Good evening, and welcome to our discussion program. Tonight, we delve into a significant and often debated question. Should individuals of all genders be required to register for the military draft? Currently, in the United States, the Selective Service System requires only men aged 18 through 25 to register. This policy has faced increasing scrutiny regarding gender equality and the nature of modern civic duty. Joining me to explore this complex issue are two distinguished guests with differing perspectives. Arguing in favor of universal registration is Major David Chen, retired from the military, who brings extensive service experience. Presenting arguments against, or expressing significant reservations, is Dr. Isabella Rossi, a sociologist specializing in gender studies and societal structures. We'll begin with opening statements from each of our guests, followed by a moderated discussion and rebuttal period, and conclude with brief closing remarks. Major Chen, would you please begin with your opening statement?
Thank you, Ms. Reed. The core of this issue, as I see it, is fundamental fairness and the principle of equal civic responsibility in a modern democracy. Our current system, mandating registration only for men, is frankly an outdated relic stemming from past eras, with very different societal norms and military structures. It implicitly suggests that the ultimate responsibility for national defense, should a draft become necessary, rests solely on one gender. This is inconsistent with the values of equality and shared sacrifice that should underpin our society. Every citizen benefits from the security and stability provided by our nation, and thus, every citizen should share in the fundamental responsibilities of citizenship, including potential military service. Furthermore, the nature of military service itself has evolved dramatically. Modern warfare and military operations demand a vast array of skills beyond traditional combat roles. We need cybersecurity experts, intelligence analysts, linguists, logisticians, medical professionals, engineers, and technicians. These are roles where gender is entirely irrelevant to capability and performance. Expanding registration to include all genders ensures that if a draft were required, the nation could draw upon the widest possible pool of talent and expertise. It's crucial to distinguish registration from conscription. Registration is simply the creation of a list, a mechanism to ensure a fair and orderly process, if, and only if, Congress and the President authorize a draft in a time of national crisis. It does not automatically mean anyone registered will be forced into combat or even into service. Universal registration sends a powerful message of national unity and shared purpose. It reinforces the idea that national security is not just the military's responsibility, but a collective civic duty. While our all-volunteer force has served admirably and effectively for decades, relying solely on volunteers might prove insufficient in a large-scale, prolonged national emergency requiring rapid mobilization. Universal registration provides a necessary backstop, guaranteeing a fair and comprehensive system under such extreme circumstances. It's time our registration policies reflect our stated values of equality and the realities of modern military needs. It is a matter of principle.
Thank you, Major Chen. Dr. Rossi, we now welcome your opening statement.
Ms. Reed, Major Chen, thank you for the opportunity to discuss this important topic. The principle of gender equality is indeed paramount in contemporary society, and I fully support the ongoing efforts to eliminate discrimination in all sectors, including the military. However, while the goal of equality is undisputed, we must critically examine whether extending mandatory draft registration to all genders is the most effective, necessary, or even desirable means to achieve that goal. In this specific context, Major Chen correctly distinguishes registration from active conscription, yet the link between the two is inherent and undeniable. Registration's sole purpose is to facilitate a potential draft. Therefore, expanding registration inevitably brings the prospect of drafting individuals of all genders into military service, including potentially into direct combat roles. Closer to reality, however remote that possibility seems now. This raises significant practical questions. Are our military training infrastructures, logistical systems, and even equipment designs fully prepared for a potentially massive, rapid influx of draftees representing the full spectrum of genders, particularly into combat arms roles? Integration within the volunteer force has been gradual and deliberate. Managing this on a compulsory, large scale during a crisis presents vastly different challenges. Beyond the military logistics, we must also consider the broader societal implications. While we strive for equality, changing a long-standing policy like draft registration could have complex effects on societal expectations and family structures that require careful consideration, not dismissal. Furthermore, the fundamental question of necessity looms large. Our nation has relied on an all-volunteer force for half a century. This force has proven highly professional, capable, and adaptable, meeting recruitment goals and operational demands effectively. Is there compelling evidence to suggest that this model is failing, or that a large-scale draft, necessitating universal registration, is a likely scenario in the foreseeable future of modern warfare? Implementing and maintaining universal registration is not without cost. It involves significant administrative burdens, data management complexities, and public communication efforts. Might these resources and our national focus be better directed towards enhancing the effectiveness, diversity, and equality of opportunity within the existing all-volunteer force? This includes continuing to remove barriers to service and promotion for all genders and ensuring fair treatment for everyone who chooses to serve. In conclusion, while motivated by the admirable principle of equality, extending mandatory draft registration raises substantial practical concerns, societal questions, and doubts about its necessity, potentially diverting resources from strengthening the force we actually depend upon.
Thank you both for those comprehensive opening statements, laying out the key arguments. Let's move into our discussion phase. Major Chen, Dr. Rossi has raised concerns about practicality and necessity. Dr. Rossi, perhaps you could first elaborate on how you propose balancing the principle of equality, which you acknowledge is vital, with the practical military and societal considerations you've mentioned regarding universal registration.
Certainly, Ms. Reed. Balancing these requires careful policy design. The challenge isn't about rejecting equality, but ensuring that the specific policy, in this case, mandatory registration, truly advances it effectively, without creating significant, avoidable problems. My concern is that registration, as the precursor to a draft, implies readiness for all potential military roles in a crisis. Historically, drafts haven't always allowed for precise skill matching in the initial stages. Expanding registration implicitly suggests that society and the military must be prepared to potentially place individuals of any gender into any role, including direct ground combat on a mass scale under duress. Are the training pipelines genuinely equipped for this scale? Is the equipment optimized? Have we fully addressed the unit integration dynamics that would arise from compulsion rather than choice? These pragmatic issues need concrete answers before we embrace the principle through this specific, potentially disruptive mechanism.
With respect, Dr. Rossi, I believe those concerns focus too heavily on the hypothetical implementation of a draft, rather than the principle of registration itself. The military is an adaptive organization. Training methodologies evolve constantly. We successfully integrated women into combat roles within the volunteer force by developing appropriate standards and training. The principle that totalitarian citizens share the potential obligation for service should be established first through equal registration. Registration is the foundational statement of equality in this context. We can, and absolutely should, address the specific logistical training and assignment challenges to ensure fairness and effectiveness the times a draft is ever enacted. Delaying equal registration now because of implementation challenges that might arise later seems like allowing potential future difficulties to justify present-day discrimination. We shouldn't put the logistical cart before the principled horse.
Major Chen, you emphasize the principle, but Dr. Rossi also questioned the necessity, particularly given the decades-long success of the all-volunteer force. Why is universal registration essential now? Why not focus resources, as she suggested, solely on enhancing equality and effectiveness within the current volunteer structure?
Because the stability we currently enjoy is not guaranteed, Ms. Reed. The all-volunteer force functions effectively under current global conditions and recruitment climates, but we cannot predict the future with certainty. A significant national emergency, perhaps a large-scale conflict or unforeseen catastrophe, could necessitate a mobilization far exceeding what the volunteer force alone can provide. Registration is the mechanism that ensures, if such a crisis occurs, the pool from which draftees are selected is fair, equitable, and represents the entire citizenry. Relying solely on volunteers means that in a true existential crisis, the burden of defense might fall disproportionately on those who happen to volunteer before the crisis, or on specific demographics. Furthermore, the current men-only registration system sends a persistent, symbolic message that the ultimate defense of the nation is primarily a male responsibility. That is fundamentally unequal and doesn't reflect the capabilities or patriotism present across all genders. Universal registration is about ensuring preparedness, guaranteeing fairness in a potential crisis, and establishing symbolic equality. These are important considerations now, not just when a crisis hits.
Major preparedness is indeed crucial, but it should be based on realistic assessments of risk and effective use of resources. The likelihood of a massive conventional draft requiring millions, akin to historical precedents, seems increasingly remote in the age of advanced military technology, cyber warfare, and highly professionalized armed forces. The insurance policy argument for universal registration needs to be carefully weighed against its tangible costs, the administrative overhead, the societal adjustments, and the potential diversion of attention and resources from optimizing the all-volunteer force we rely on daily. If the volunteer force is successfully meeting its targets, maintaining high standards, and proving effective in modern conflicts, isn't strengthening that force the most practical and relevant form of preparedness? Ensuring our volunteer military has the best personnel, training, equipment, and support systems while promoting diversity and equality within its ranks seems a more direct route to national security than registering millions who may never serve and may not wish to.
Let's touch upon military effectiveness directly. How might expanding the registration pool potentially impact training requirements, unit cohesion, or overall readiness, considering the points both of you have made about modern skills versus integration challenges?
From my perspective, expanding the pool inherently increases the potential talent available to the military, should a draft occur. As I mentioned, modern military effectiveness relies heavily on a wide range of skills: technical, analytical, linguistic, medical, not solely on physical prowess traditionally associated with combat roles. A universally registered population provides access to a much broader spectrum of individuals possessing these critical, diverse skills. Regarding cohesion and training, the military has already demonstrated its ability to integrate women successfully into nearly all roles by applying capability-based standards. Applying these same objective standards during a potential draft, drawing from a universally registered and diverse population, wouldn't inherently decrease effectiveness. Managed properly, with appropriate screening and assignment based on aptitude and military needs, it could significantly enhance overall capability by bringing in essential expertise from all segments of society.
While capability-based standards are the ideal, the reality of rapidly integrating potentially vast numbers of draftees from diverse backgrounds, genders, and potentially varying levels of physical conditioning presents immense logistical and training challenges. This scenario is fundamentally different from the gradual, voluntary integration we have seen. rapidly scaling up training facilities, ensuring the availability of appropriate gear and uniforms for all body types, and managing the social dynamics within newly formed units under the duress of conscription could significantly strain resources. This strain could potentially impact short-term readiness and effectiveness precisely during a critical national emergency. Unit cohesion, especially crucial in high-stress combat or support environments, often relies on shared experience, rigorous training, and mutual trust, which is arguably harder and takes longer to forge within a diverse, hastily assembled conscripted force compared to a professional volunteer force. These aren't necessarily insurmountable obstacles, but they represent significant practical hurdles that directly impact the quote effectiveness argument and shouldn't be underestimated.
A final area before we move to closing thoughts: the broader societal messages. What impact does maintaining the current system versus changing to universal registration have on prevailing gender roles and societal expectations about citizenship and responsibility?
Maintaining the status quo, as Major Chen rightly noted earlier, undeniably perpetuates an outdated message that the ultimate responsibility for national defense is gendered. It subtly reinforces traditional gender roles that we have otherwise worked hard to dismantle in many other areas of society. However, abruptly imposing universal registration could also send complex and potentially disruptive signals. Some might perceive it as imposing a burden historically associated with men onto women, without necessarily having achieved full equality in other critical areas, like economic opportunity, political representation, or freedom from gender-based violence. There's a risk it could be seen as adding a responsibility without commensurate progress across the board. The societal reception and interpretation need careful consideration beyond the pure legal principle.
I view the societal message quite differently, Dr. Rossi. Extending draft registration universally sends a powerful and unequivocally positive message that citizenship entails both rights and responsibilities, and these are shared equally by all, regardless of gender. It actively affirms that individuals of all genders are equally capable, equally valued, and equally responsible for contributing to the security and well-being of the nation. It helps to dismantle the archaic notion that defense and national service are exclusively or primarily male domains. This isn't about imposing a male burden onto others. It's about recognizing a fundamental civic duty that logically applies to all citizens in an equitable society. Taking this step is a move towards normalizing shared responsibility and further breaking down harmful gender stereotypes, which ultimately strengthens the social fabric and aligns our policies with our democratic ideals.
We are nearing the end of our discussion time. Thank you both for that thorough exchange. We will now move to closing statements. Each of you will have a brief opportunity to summarize your position. Dr. Rossi, you have the floor first.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. In summary, while the principle of gender equality is a cornerstone of modern society and one I fully endorse, extending mandatory draft registration to all genders presents itself as a policy measure whose necessity and practicality remain questionable. The arguments presented today have highlighted potentially significant challenges related to military implementation, societal adaptation, and the fundamental question of whether such a measure is needed given the proven success and adaptability of our all-volunteer force. The administrative costs, logistical hurdles, and potential societal disruptions associated with universal registration appear to outweigh the uncertain benefits derived from registering millions for a draft that remains a remote contingency. Our national focus and resources, I maintain, would be more productively invested in continuing to enhance the all-volunteer force, ensuring true equality of opportunity within its ranks, and equipping it to meet contemporary security challenges. Therefore, based on the current evidence and balance of considerations, expanding mandatory registration seems an unnecessary and potentially counterproductive policy direction at this juncture.
Thank you, Dr. Rossi. Major Chen, your closing statement, please.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. Tonight's discussion reinforces what I believe is a fundamental point. Universal draft registration is intrinsically linked to the principles of equality, fairness, and shared civic duty. It is a necessary step to correct a discriminatory policy rooted in outdated gender norms, a policy inconsistent with our national values. The modern military requires a wide array of skills found across our entire population, and universal registration ensures fairness and access to this complete talent pool should a national crisis ever demand mobilization. This is not primarily about the likelihood of conscription. It is about establishing the foundational principle that national security is a responsibility shared by all citizens. Doing so strengthens national unity, enhances preparedness, and sends a clear message about our commitment to equality. Addressing the logistical details of implementation is important work for the military, but these details should follow, not impede, the establishment of this equitable and principled foundation. Universal registration is a necessary, symbolic, and ultimately practical step towards fulfilling the promise of equal citizenship for all.
Major David Chen, Dr. Isabella Rossi, thank you both for a compelling and insightful debate on this complex and important issue. You've clearly articulated the inherent tension between the vital principle of gender equality and the practical considerations surrounding national security, military readiness, and societal impact. Thank you to our audience for